Am I free to go?
I want my lawyer now.
I want a lawyer right now.
Mr. Nolan, it's for you.
My name is Patrick Nolan. I'm an attorney licensed in the state of Missouri. This is Pat Talks Law. Welcome back. We are going to talk about the Utah lady who was charged with being topless in her own home. For those of you who may not remember, Tilli Buchanan was charged with 3 counts of lewdness, which carried a possible jail sentence and up to 10 years. 10 years on the sex offender registry because she was topless in her own home. Now, like all stories, there's more to it. It was her stepchildren that saw her topless along with her husband. The husband's ex-wife is the one who turned this into law enforcement, claiming that Tilli had ripped off her top one day and refused to put it back on while she was drunk unless her husband whipped out his penis. Now, this is unsubstantiated by what we know. However, they appealed, they filed a case challenging the statute as being unconstitutional. Now, I'm going to read to you a little bit out of USA Today. The judge refused to overturn the lewdness law in January and made a ruling. The judge said that, lewdness is commonly understood to include a woman's breast. And the judge is not going to second guess what lawmakers decided was lewd conduct. Now, that decision, and that's a very brief summary of what someone else wrote as a summary of the court's opinion. So, essentially what this gets, and the argument that Buchanan and the ACLU made, was that Utah's law on lewdness was unfair because it treats men and women differently for bearing their chest. And there's a reasonable argument to that. It wasn't very long ago that in Colorado, a federal court held that a city statute city ordinance, barring female nudity was unconstitutional. And the Buchanan case is in the same circuit. And you see me pointing, we have a new setup, and you've probably noticed it. I have moved a camera and rig into actually my office at my desk, which hopefully will make it a little bit easier for us to put out content, decent content, more frequently. But I also have a screen right here, and you can see the reflection on it, where I have this information. Now, some things we will use a teleprompter for, however, this one we're not. So, Buchanan and the ACLU are arguing that it's unconstitutional. The judge disagreed. And then the question is whether or not they would appeal that portion of the decision. And to do that, of course, they're going to have to go forward with the trial. Now, she was facing 3 counts of lewdness involving a child. That means she was facing, I believe it was up to a year in jail on each count, and 10 years on the sex offender registry. I will tell you, 10 years on the sex offender registry is a huge penalty. Huge. And it's a massive risk. So, ultimately, Ms. Buchanan and her attorney sat down. They looked at what the risks were. They looked at the expenses. Because let's talk about, for just 1 minute, what the expenses that they could have incurred. Appealing court decision up through the Utah courts into federal courts, that would be a massive undertaking. It could very easily run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, because this is what it is, if she had gone forward and been on the sex offender registry and then they're undertaking the appeal, she's going to be on the registry while that appeal goes. So ultimately what they decided is that she accepted a plea bargain. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of lewdness. in front of an adult who found her being topless, baring her breast, exposing her breast in front of an adult, which caused affront or alarm. The adult is her husband. In Utah, a judge allowed a woman to plead guilty to 1 count of lewdness because she bared her breast to her husband in her house. That pause was reality shattering for just a moment. An American woman was charged with lewdness, was convicted of lewdness in a plea bargain for baring her breast to her husband in her home. I can't think of a more appropriate place for a woman to bare her breast to her husband, to show her husband her bare breast, but in her home. Now for this, what's going to happen is they're going to hold, because of the plea, is held in abeyance. That is, I'm assuming, roughly our equivalent in Missouri to a suspended imposition sentence, or a deferred prosecution in other places. It's different terms, it's essentially the same thing. As long as she remains free from any other criminal charges for 1 year and pays a $600 fine and court costs, this will go away. It won't be a conviction on her record. And that's a good thing. But what this case shows is it shows some of the problems that are inherent with our criminal justice system. There's a lot of power the prosecution has and exerts over a criminal defendant. Part of that power, part of that problem is the risk-reward decision. You have to make such an important decision on how you're going to fight, because the potential risk can be so bloody high. If you lose a case like Ms. Buchanan's, a year in jail, yes, that's serious, but that has a lower impact than 10 years on the sex offender registry. If you're on the sex offender registry, there are a lot of things that you cannot do. You can't go to your kids' school plays. You can't go to the kids' school without special clearance for a parent-teacher meeting beforehand. You can't be there. Okay? There are a lot of things that you cannot do. And if you're on a sex offender registry in Utah and you've had to register federally, you have to register in Missouri if you were to come to Missouri. It's really quite sad. Our sex offender registries and registry process is allows for no remediation of behavior, really. You can come off a sex offender registry in Missouri after 10 years if you meet certain criteria and for certain offenses. 25 years for others, and for tier 3 you'll never be off the registry in Missouri. And there are offenses that merits that. I'm not going to say there aren't, but it is a pretty harsh system. And that's because Americans by and large are very Puritan in our sexual mores, despite what we're surround ourselves with. But in this case, she pleaded out to an offense that is ridiculous on its face. And she took a plea because the cost of defending herself was so high. Her case could have easily run into $100,000 by the time she appealed it all the way up through federal court. That would not be out of line. Meanwhile, her criminal case, she very well could have been convicted, spent time in jail, and been on a sex offender list while this is happening. And those cases aren't quick. This could have been in court for another 5 years. So that is something that is Very, very important. Now, there are a lot of people that are going to be quick to jump on her and say, well, her husband's ex-wife said X. Well, yeah, he did, but you know what? She wasn't convicted of that. Or yeah, she did, but Miss Buchanan was not convicted of that. The husband's ex-wife made a number of allegations, and exes, both male and female, have a tendency to make a lot of wild allegations. Spend any time in family law court, go and sit down and listen to some of the crap that's slung around in there. It's appalling. They almost sound as bad as politicians. So this was just a quick update to the Buchanan story. So ultimately she took a plea, kind of figured she would once she saw the legal bills coming due, but that plea makes the case go away for her in 1 year as long as she stays out of trouble, pays $600, and she pleaded guilty to exposing her breast to her husband in her home. Yeah, I said that right. It's a shame and it's appalling. Now, if you like the update to the previous story, if you like what we're doing, if you like the appearance here, I think this is a better lighting situation myself. I'd like to hear your comments. But please hit like, hit subscribe if you haven't subscribed to us yet. Smash the alert bell so you know when our next video is coming up. I'm anticipating that we're going to be seeing more videos because this will be an easier system. Right now we're still working on connecting the camera to the computer that'll allow us to do production a little bit faster. So there are things that we are working on, and I do appreciate it, and we'll be talking to you again soon.